Eddsworld. Such a classic cartoon from the web. Starting all the way back in 2003, I think it's pretty safe to say that Eddsworld has had an influence on so many people, myself included. Ever since I've discovered it way back in 2019, I've loved it ever since. Eddsworld will always hold a special place in my heart, being the reason where I am right now. With such a deep and long history as Eddsworld, I thought it would be appropriate to rank and review each and every single episode. First I'll recap the episode, then I'll give my thoughts on it, and then finally I'll give it a rating out of 20. So without further ado, let's get on with the Eddsworld ranking. Yeah, probably not what you expect from the first one, right? Despite what most people said about the Christmas special being the first real episode, I just kind of like this short. I think it's underrated, and that's why it's up first. Yeah, a bit bizarre, but things will continue normally after this, I promise. This short has that early 2000s charm to it with the copyrighted music, and the bad animation, and all that. The episode follows a guy named Eddie who gets a call from what I can only assume is the Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper goes to his house and kills him, only to realize that he actually just stabbed a dummy. Then the real Eddie shoots him from behind, where it's revealed to be Eddie's friend Stuart all along. Some friend. Yeah, then this other kid crawls out through the back of the window, presumably to kill Eddie. First of all, is this short bad? Yes. But that's why I love it so much. The animation is nothing stellar, and the story makes no sense. Like, why would you feel remorse for killing your friend when your friend tried to kill you in the first place? He had the right to do so. And I'm overanalyzing Flash cartoons. Anyway, while I don't think it's good, I think it's charming enough to hold a special place in my heart. And for that, I'll give it a 10 out of 20. It's not half bad. Finally, the real first episode, I guess you would call it. I'm gonna cut Ed some slack because these are his older cartoons, and of course they're bound to be bad. My old cartoons suck too. And even some of my new cartoons, but yeah. Basically, Santa breaks his leg after Tom forgets to take out the firewood. So Ed, Tom, and Tord have to deliver presents for him. Tord accidentally drops a Santa list, so they have to guess who gets a present and who gets coal. They come across a bunch of people that are probably references to Ed's older animations and friends, as well as the KKK. Yeah, moving on. So after that, they get back and they basically forget to deliver their own presents, only to see that Santa gave them a bunch of presents. And yeah, that's basically it. This episode, in all honesty, is underwhelming. There aren't really any stakes outside of Tord losing the list, but then again, this was just the beginning, so I'll cut him some slack. The episode can also be a bit boring, with the only really eventful thing being the presents that the different characters receive. The animation is very flawed, but it has that early 2000s charm to it. So because of Ed's earlier work, and also because it's kind of charming, I'll give it a 12 out of 20. Yeah, this is a weird episode. So basically, this new girl moves in, and Ed and Tord begin to simp over her. They do things to help her and whatnot. They begin to fight over her love and give her gifts, and even go as far as Ed attempting to kill Tord. Yeah, these guys are nuts. Turns out that the girl's actually already dating someone, and their hearts are broken. But then in the end, they both, yeah, I'm not gonna say any more about this. This episode's nothing too special. It's just kind of jarring to see these simplistic cartoons mixed with this very real anime-like art style, and it hasn't aged very well. This episode has a bit more going compared to the Christmas special with Ed and Tord fighting at the end, but overall, I think it's just kind of tropey, and I don't really like it all too much. But then again, this is Ed's earlier work, so I guess I'll cut him some slack here. But yeah, it's not too great. 9 out of 20. After their car crashes, yeah, that's not the right word. After their car gets flipped over by some passerby, Ed and his friends go into a town to find a repair kit. Inside the town, they find that it's infested by zombies, and Matt gets his arm chomped off by one of them. They run away twice, and then they find a portaloo, which is kind of gross. They decide that they should find weapons and go looting in a mall. With all the weapons gathered, they go back to the area only to find that it's empty.
Well, at least we found the repair kit.
Yep, Matt's a zombie now. And they have this epic fight scene where Tord is eaten, and Ed and Tom run away. Tord then appears in the back of their car. I guess we have to find out what happens next. I actually really like this episode. It's enjoyable and has that classic 2000s charm to it. While on its own it's just kind of mediocre, I think that has a much more coherent story. We see conflicts with stakes in it, and I mean, it's not hard to have stakes with zombies, and you kind of get this mystery of what's going on and why the town's infested. It apparently took Ed 7 months to make this, which seems like a long time, but I think that for the time it kind of shows. The animation is kind of the same though. Obviously it's Ed's older work, so he doesn't have that really great of animation skills. But I think that shot of the Portaloo turning 3D was pretty cool. And there were some more hand-drawn animations rather than using tweens. Overall, it was pretty good. 15 out of 20. This episode is basically just an interview with Ed, Tom, and Tord, but not Matt, I guess. He wasn't really part of the crew back then. Anyway, Ed talks about how he works a lot. Tom talks about how he gets drunk, which leads to him getting kicked out. And Tord, yeah, we're just gonna move on from that. This episode's nothing special, really. It's just the characters talking to a camera with nothing more to do. The only thing I found interesting was that the background looked kind of weird, since Flash didn't support blurred backgrounds back then, so the way they do it I just thought was kind of neat. But yeah, this episode gets a 9 out of 10. There was nothing really too special about it. This short involves a mysterious figure killing off Ed, Tom, and Tord, where it's revealed to actually be Matt. I guess he got revenge for not being a part of the show. Good for him, you know. There's then what I can only guess is a reference to a movie I've probably never seen. Yeah, I don't really watch any movies in case you couldn't tell. So what are my overall thoughts? It's fine. The older episodes are just kind of more experimental, and they don't really have much of a cohesive story to them. And this episode overall doesn't really have any substance to it. It's just kind of there to be forgotten, I guess. This episode gets an 8 out of 20, and yeah, I hope that things will get better from here. Oh wow, it's already been a year since the first Christmas special. Matt's not a part of the main group still. You'll be loved one day, Matt. Don't worry. This episode, Ed goes into his office where he drinks a buttload of cola. Then a guardian angel descends from heaven, I guess.
Ed, I am your guardian angel. I'm here to show you what the world would be like if you never existed.
Why?
Because if I make you change your ways, I will get my wings.
Okay, I'm bored anyway.
This plot doesn't really make any sense to me. I mean, Ed wasn't really played off as a jerk. He just kind of drank some cola. I think this would have been improved if maybe Ed did something before to cause this to happen, but yeah. Maybe it's because he didn't include Matt in the group. I don't know. Anyway, the Guardian Angel shows how Tord became a full communist and how he's now friends with Tom. And now Tom and Tord make, movies. Yeah, let's just go with that. Matt became a homeless person because, of course he did, and nobody cares about Matt, which I hate. I mean, come on, man. Why is there so much Matt hate in these older episodes? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The angel says that since Ed never existed, coal sales have dropped, and Ed tries to ask the Guardian Angel something, but he disappears. What a jerk. Ed now thinks he's trapped in this reality until he finds that there's a cola can in his pocket. So he rushes back, and everyone wishes him a happy Christmas. So yeah, I don't think this episode's really that good. Compared to Zombie Attack, the story here isn't really great, and it doesn't really make that much sense. Like, why is Ed being shown this? Like, he didn't really do anything wrong to deserve it, and yeah. The conflict is, like, resolved in less than a minute, which just makes it feel kind of rushed, you know? And overall, this episode is just kind of boring. It's an 8 out of 20. Another short video. This time, Ed gets in a snowball fight with Tord, who throws a snowball at him, which causes a flashback of bad experience he had with the snow. When he fell into an ice pond, tripped and fell into a snowy hill, got his tongue stuck on a pole, and Tom kicking a giant snowball in his way. Of course, Matt isn't in the video as expected. But yeah, the problem with these earlier episodes is that they were mostly just little short videos with not much to them. I don't blame Ed for this, because he was kind of younger back then, and yeah, you can't really blame him for that. But yeah, that doesn't stop me from finding this episode forgettable. This one gets another 8 out of 20. Well, here we have another short. This time Ed sends Tord an embarrassing photo of him holding a teddy bear. So Tord tries tracking Ed down, going through zombies, helicopters, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Once he reaches Edd's house, he realizes that Edd had actually planted a bomb in his seat, which blows up and lands him in the beach, where Edd's just chilling. You know, as you do, just chill while your friend literally blows up. But yeah, that's basically the video. But before the video ends, Edd actually sends an embarrassing photo of Tom, too. Wow, that's kind of tough. I think this episode has charm to it. While it wasn't too memorable, I did find it a little more memorable due to its charm. The video, again, is nothing too special, and the conflict doesn't have too much substance to it, but it's just really showing off some cool and creative places, and I don't know why I like it, but I kind of like it better than the other sorts. I guess kind of like the same reason why I like Eddie Baggy Pants for its charm, so for that I'll give it a 10 out of 20. Not something I'd rewatch, but something I wouldn't mind watching either. Here we have another zombie attack episode. Let's hope that this one's as good as the first. This episode basically starts with Tord's funeral, which is a pretty somber start to an episode if you ask me. Tord manages to escape from his grave and goes over to Edd's house, where he threatens to eat his brains if he doesn't help Tord to get the Necronomicon. Which is supposed to be some kind of like spell book, which helps Tord with a zombie curse or something. Yeah, it's kind of confusing. Meanwhile, Matt also escapes from his grave and asks Tom to help him. And while Edd and Tord are driving, they spot Tom and Matt, so that leads to them crashing their car in an attempt to foil their plans. Edd and Tord leave the car where they find a crap ton of zombies, which they kill in this epic copyrighted fight scene. After getting to the Necronomicon, Matt's greeted with 3 books. Some random guy takes the first book, which blows his head off, which I thought was pretty funny. Matt takes the second book, which traps him inside the book, and Tord takes the third book, which leads him to ascend into heaven. Edd and Tom are now left there, and they just leave. Matt, however, isn't finished with them. This episode's fine. As you can tell, a lot happens here, but doesn't really have much substance to it. I don't think it's bad by any means, but it doesn't seem to have as much passion put into it as the other parts. Besides the joke about the guy's head blowing off, there wasn't really much comedy here. However, one positive I can give it is the animation. You can really start to see Edd's style evolve here from the last couple of episodes. The art style is relatively the same, but you can tell that there's a slight difference, and it looks slightly better. I feel like this is the point where Edd's art starts improving more and more, but overall I think this episode just feels kind of rushed, and maybe if it had more time put into it, could have been just as fantastic as the first part. But as it stands, it gets a 12 out of 20. Okay, so for this one I can't exactly recap it since, well, it's just a collection of skits, but I'll try to do my best to critique it. I don't think it's very funny. Yeah, I know, it's a precursor to Ast's movie, which I do enjoy, but I don't really find this episode in particular to be all too funny. Tom's older work to me seemed like he was trying a little too hard to be funny, and I think that kind of shows over here. I don't want to be too critical since, again, this is his older work, and yeah, you're bound to be not very good in your older work, but again, it just feels like a bunch of random equals funny jokes, which can sometimes drag on for way too long and overstays welcome. Overall, I didn't really enjoy this episode all too much, but again, it's Tom's older work, so I'll cut him a little bit of slack. 10 out of 20. Alright, back to the standard Eddsworld episode. In this one, Edd wakes up and begins cooking some bacon. Tord, who now has a nose for some reason, smells the bacon. He gets some from the fridge only to realize that Edd already took all the bacon. So Tord tries stealing the bacon and it gets thrown out the window. This leads to Edd and Tord having a fight for the bacon, which eventually leads to them going outside. And while outside, they find a truck of bacon and run towards it, not following basic traffic rules and getting hit by a car. They wake up in a hospital where Tord asks for bacon only to realize that Edd already ate the last bacon. And thus, the cycle continues. And the episode ends. I'm just gonna say this right now, I love this episode. It doesn't have a plot to it, which usually I don't really like all too much, but I think the comedy and sheer ridiculousness of this episode really makes up for it. This episode is not meant to be taken seriously, and we, as well as the people who created it, are aware of that. And, you know, sometimes you don't need to really take things seriously. It's just kind of like a fun episode where you just sit back and have a good laugh. It gets a 15 out of 20 from me. Another episode that I actually really like. In this episode, Matt leaves the train station only to be greeted by zombies. He runs away from the zombies, but then gets trapped in the train station. Out of options, he calls their home phone and tells Edd, Tom, and Tord to help him. In order to get to the train station, they go through an old house which is infested by a bunch of zombies. While they think of an escape plan, Matt is busy trying to find a weapon to use, and he settles on a broom. And let me just say it, I love this joke that they have here.
I can't just hide here. I need to find a weapon. No? Too predictable.
Yeah, I don't know, something about this is just really funny to me. Back at the old house, their plan is to barge through the zombies with a bathtub appropriately named the Bathmobile. They reach the train station and save Matt, but before they leave, they have to fight more zombies. I love this fight scene where we get to see a lot of cool things happen, like this 3D sword, which just looks really cool, similar to like the Portaloo scene in Zombie Attack 1. Anyway, Tord basically lights a cigarette, which leads to the place burning down in what's probably one of my favorite Eddsworld scenes. The copyrighted music begins to amp up as we see Ed, Matt, Tom, and Tord run away from the flaming train station. As they escape, a helicopter comes down, but they mistake them all for zombies. The episode ends with them being presumably shot to death. Ouch. Man, I could go on and on about why I love this episode. It's very clear that Ed had a lot of time and effort put into this video, and the visuals look really good for what could be done at the time. And the episode itself is just really funny. I love how Tom has to ask why they need to save Matt, and the scene of Matt with the monkey doll. And this episode is just a fun ride the whole way through. If this is what things are going to look like for the future of Eddsworld, I personally can't wait. 17 out of 20. We're now back to another short. This one follows Ed being greeted by someone at the door. He assumes it's Santa and opens it with joy, only to be greeted by Death himself. After trying to get rid of Death, he throws some gravy at him, which is apparently his only weakness for some reason. This causes him to disappear. I love the way how it just sinks to the ground. It's just a really funny visual, and I love it. While this episode doesn't really have that much going for it, it definitely has its charms to it. I personally think this is just a goofy little episode. It's not boring, and it'll just give you a quick little laugh before you move on with your day. And while it isn't much to look at, I think it's still some good stuff, and for that, I'll give it a 13 out of 20. This episode basically just follows Ed, Matt, Tom, and Tord deciding to go to hell, so you just look it up on Google and summon an elevator to hell. Already, I love this episode. It's clear right off the bat that it's going to be so dumb, and yet it's going to be so funny. They go inside the elevator and fall chaotically to hell, where in hell they realize that it's a tourist attraction. You can't really get any better than this, I'm just saying. Tom goes into the Jehovah's Witness door instead, which is a reference to how TomSka in real life used to be a Jehovah's Witness. But yeah, he basically gets trapped in this white void. Meanwhile, Ed, Matt, and Tord check out hell, which, I will say, does look quite nice. They go inside a restaurant where Tom then drops in, quite literally actually. They find their personal hells where we see Ed not being able to get a cola can from the cola machine. Matt apparently hates Ed, and that's his personal hell. And Tom gets scared of a black guy. Wait, he's not racist. Oh wait, it's from space, never mind. And then towards hell, is him constantly listening to Sunshine Lollipops. Guess he hates that song. The gang now traumatized leave hell, and thus the episode is finished. This episode's really funny. It takes something that's usually seen as like creepy and scary and turns it into something hilarious. Hell just being a tourist attraction is so absurd and ridiculous that's absolutely hilarious. And this episode is just the essence of what Eddsworld's like overall. The gags here are great. I love the scene of the elevator falling down, and then when you look inside, they're just kind of chilling there like it's nothing. And you can also see the classic old 2000s style. And you can also see Ed's art really improving more and more. While it still looks kind of rough around the edges, I still think it's definitely a step in the right direction. One flaw I have with it is that with the personal hells, while I do find the hells with Ed and Tord funny, since, you know, it kind of makes sense that that's something that they would do, the ones with Matt and Tom don't really make any sense. I mean, we've never seen any jokes of Matt hating Ed or Tom being racist or something like that. But besides that, I think this episode's fantastic, and although I like Zombie Nations a little bit more, I think this is a 17 out of 20. This episode follows Ed realizing he's the only person left on Earth, so he does what most typical people would probably do and run around doing whatever he wants to do. From stealing a bus to messing up people's art galleries, yeah, he just does all that stuff. But as always, good things must come to an end, and Ed slowly goes insane, creating puppets of Tom and Tord, and eventually killing himself. Jeez, that got dark pretty fast. So what are my thoughts on this episode? Well, obviously it's a shorter video compared to the more longer episodes like Zombie Nation and Hello Hellhole, but I think it has its charm to it, you know? The old Flash cartoons from the mid-2000s are just kind of something else. But then again, just like most of these shorts, it doesn't have too much substance to it. The story is an overdone trope of like, what if you were the last person left on Earth? Or something like that. I did find that little dark twist at the end to be kind of funny, because it was so out of left field and just not something that seems like Eddsworld, but besides that, this episode's just okay. Not really any standout moments besides, like I said, the ending, but still. It's a passable episode with its flaw being that it's a basic plot with not really any substance. 13 out of 20. Ah yes, the third and final installment to the Zombie Attack trilogy. So basically, Tord comes back again to inform Edd and Tom both about how Matt has returned. Tom shoots Tord because of course he does, and Edd and Tom decide that they should go help and defeat Matt, who's created an entire zombie army. One touch I really like about this is how the zombies now have like a more purplish color. It really gives the zombies a unique touch compared to like the typical green that you usually see in zombies. Anyway, Edd and Tom decided they should plan an attack. Tom wants to throw beer bottles at the zombies, but Edd's against that obviously. Instead, they decide to attack them with this really cool fight scene that I really like. While it's nothing too special, it definitely adds some cool parts to it, like when Tom dodges a chainsaw and the final shot where Edd hits Matt with that chicken thing. Anyway, after the fight scene ends, Tom and Edd realize that they've already been bitten, which is honestly a pretty somber way to end the trilogy. I love this shot where you just see the silhouettes of all the dead zombies surrounding Tom and Edd.
Boogity brains.
Oh wait, never mind. So what do I think of this episode? Well, it's a little underwhelming compared to the other two parts. The only plot is really that Matt has returned and they just fight them basically. But besides that, there's really not much going to it, and it just kind of feels like another basic plot, which is kind of disappointing since the other two parts had some pretty alright plots compared to this one. One plus which I know will make me sound like a broken record is the animation. A lot of the shots are getting more and more dynamic, and again, you can see Edd's animation is starting to improve more and more as time goes on. Especially when comparing it to the second part, and especially the first part. But besides that, I think this episode is just a bit of a letdown for the third and final part of a series that I actually quite enjoyed. But then again, this isn't the worst thing in the world. So for that, I'll give it an 11 out of 20. In this episode, the gang go into this ruined tomb area thing to find some treasure. Down there, they come across a fork in the road and eventually decide to split up, with Edd going with Tom and Matt going with Tord. Edd and Tom go through the first corridor where Edd tricks Tom into going in a pretty deadly trap. Not cool, Edd. Meanwhile, Matt and Tord go into the other corridor where they run into a blatantly obvious booby trap. Their joke, not mine. The trap comes with all the classics, including spike walls and sand, and of course, just to add the icing on the cake, Sunshine and Lollipops plays. Matt and Tord somehow manage to escape, and Tom is somehow able to survive, but they realize that the treasure chest was just right in front of them. But that's too bad because there are mummies there, and they have this pretty cool fight scene where one of the mummies summons a bunch of other mummies. After they defeat the mummy, they open up the chest, but of course, in classic Eddsworld fashion, the chest is a trap. I love this episode. I like these more longer episodes, and you can really tell that they're more fleshed out with more story to them, as well as there being more time and effort put into them. I especially found this funny with the self-aware gag of Tom's black eyes, Sunshine Lollipop playing on the radio, and especially the last scene where the chest is actually a trap. This episode is an absolute riot the whole way through, and you can tell Edd and his friends really had a lot of fun making this episode, because it's just much better compared to all the other episodes. And of course, how can I not mention the animation? You can definitely see it's getting more and more defined, and you can start to see more art and animation techniques used in these newer animations. And this is really like the first episode that just has like classic Eddsworld style with like these longer episodes, and honestly I'm pretty excited to see more of these. 17 out of 20. Alright, so basically Edd, Matt, Tom, and Tord get chased down by a serial killer, with Edd having his head cut off. Jesus. And then Tom and Tord get stabbed, and Matt falls down the stairs. Now Edd, Tom, and Tord are wait, where's Matt? Oh yeah, Matt somehow managed to survive, but of course, at the sight of seeing a ghost, he has a heart attack and dies. Classic Matt. The four of them dump the serial killer's body in a cliff with spikes at the bottom, but of course, the serial killer comes back as a ghost too. But that doesn't last for too long, as they all get trapped in a ghost trap set by the Ghostbusters? Yep, that's how the episode ends. I think this is a really fun episode. It's got some really funny gags like Matt dying from the heart attack, or the Tord painting that he used as a disguise. I also thought the shot of Tord getting stabbed was pretty cool. The story is kind of overdone, with the characters each getting killed being a little unoriginal, but that's basically where the complaints end. I love the animation for the most part. I know I keep saying this, but Edd's animation is starting to look really good. You can really see a lot of cool things like the ghost effect and again, the Tord death scene. Overall, it's a pretty fine episode, if not a little overdone. But I personally think it's a really fun watch. 16 out of 20. This episode starts with Tom hunting down Santa, only to realize that's actually Xanta, an evil zombie version of Santa. So Ed, Tom, Matt, and Tord go to one of the houses that Santa landed on to find out that he actually eats the kids who are on the naughty list. Unfortunately, they're also on the naughty list, so they get on a cola truck thinking that they can escape Santa. But of course, Santa comes back and tries to attack them anyways, until Santa shows up. Anyway, after Santa defeats Santa, he gives the four of them presents and goes on his merry way. I think this episode's fantastic. The jokes are really funny, and I think it's creative to have like an evil Santa that just eats people who are naughty. And the jokes here are really funny, from Tom eating the pie, Ed not thanking the milkman, and also when Tom and Santa get hit by a bunch of tree branches. It's just quality stuff. The weakness here is that there isn't much of a story going on. They just kind of see what Santa does, then escape Santa, only for Santa to come back, and it just isn't very compelling in that aspect. But in my opinion, the humor more than makes up for it. This is one of the funniest episodes I've ever seen, and Santa's probably one of the funniest characters in Eddsworld. This episode is great. It gets a 16 out of 20. Again, I can't want to recap these since they're just a collection of skits, so I guess I'll just jump into the review. I think this one's really funny. You can really see the improvement, and while there were some jokes that dragged on for a little bit too long like the movie one, I think that jokes in that skit were funny enough to keep my attention. And you can see how Tom's style of humor and random equals funny jokes in here, but I think they're done much better overall. The jokes don't feel like they're trying too hard to be funny, and overall, it's pretty funny, if not for a few duds here and there. 15 out of 20. In this episode, Ed, Matt, Tom, and Tor go to movie theaters only for that movie to get 4 viewers, being them, of course. The director, Bing, isn't happy about this at all, so he decides to make 4 clones of Ed, Matt, Tom, and Tord in order to make more viewers for the movie. But after the film finishes, the clones go off and do whatever they want, which Bing didn't really think through. Let me just say right off the bat, I love Bing here. He's so dumb to the point where it's not necessarily annoying, but rather funny. Anyway, the clones leave the theater, and they first go to an arcade in this really funny arcade scene. I love the joke of the punching bag that literally just has a level called Tom, and the scene where the truck in Ed's game goes through the wall in real life is just really hilarious. After getting ripped off by the arcade, they decide to burn it down and then decide to go home. The real Ed, Tom, Matt, and Tord get bombarded by these clones, who steal the last cola can from Ed. This causes a really cool fight scene where the clones are all killed. Bing finally finds out where the clones went, only for him to realize that one of the Matt clones escaped. So instead of killing the Matt clone, they dump Tom's body in a dumpster and make Matt into Tom. This is just a really funny episode, and I love how it ends. You know, Spared is such a good episode. The plot has a lot going for it with like the movie theaters, to Bing, and the arcade scene, the fight scene, as well as the conclusion. It's all just really funny, and the clones just make it even funnier. I love the arcade scene and the fight scene were surprisingly pretty good. And how could I not talk about the evil director Bing? He's hilarious, with his plans to make the clones being so dumb yet so genius at the same time. And his sidekick Larry just being the polar opposite of Bing is just great. Another thing that I should probably mention is the music. What Eddsworld would usually do back then was they would use copyrighted music, but yeah, now they don't do that anymore. They use their own original music, made by his friends most of the time. So I thought it would be appropriate to review the new music too. The music here is really good. Tom was the one that made the music for the arcade scene as well as the intro, and he does a pretty good job. And I love his music here. And Chris Bingham, who was also the voice actor for the director, did the music for the end credits, and it has some remix lines from the episode, but it works surprisingly well. Overall, this episode's fantastic, hilarious, and it's one of my favorite episodes so far, 19 out of 20. In this episode, Ed, Tom, Matt, and Tor decide to join the army, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. They meet up with Sergeant Hillerson, or as Ed likes to call him, Hillary.
Sir, can I call you Hillary? Sir?
They go through a bunch of different training sessions before being drafted into the war. Wow, that was pretty fast, only took like a minute and 34 seconds or something. Anyway, they parachute down, but Tor decides to use a jetpack instead, truly a legend of his time. I also noticed that Tor seems to be the only one that's actually excited about the war, and you know what? Good for him, you do you, man. They go inside the enemy base, where they find a tank and unknowingly destroy the entire base while they're inside it. It's honestly really funny. They eventually leave the tank where they meet up with Sergeant Hillerson, shocked at the destruction of the base. If you couldn't already tell, not a lot happens in this episode, which is usually a negative, but the jokes and humor here are just something else. This is possibly one of the funniest episodes along with some of the other work Ed's made lately. I love the joke of Ed scrubbing Hillerson's face on the floor and the joke of Tom saying how they only trained for like a minute and 34 seconds. I thought that was pretty funny. And the detail of Tord being the only person smiling was a really funny touch, and the gag of the hippo falling on Tord was priceless. It's random, but it worked really well. I can't really say much about the music since they kind of went back to using copyrighted music, but I think it still looks fine here. Overall, this episode is a fantastic installment to the Eddsworld catalog. 19 out of 20. Well, we finally reached here, the infamous Tord leaving episode. This episode's pretty underrated. It starts off with Tord leaving, and that's really all the episode's known for. But that's why I think it's an underrated episode, because besides the whole Tord thing, it's actually really good and funny. This episode follows Matt flushing the keys to the fridge down the toilet. Matt, why'd you bring the keys to the bathroom? Anyway, after that they have to go down to the toilet to retrieve them, which eventually leads them to the lost city of Atlantis. I love this place. It's so creative with all the fish creatures and the way they're designed and all that. They're easily able to find the key, which is in an exhibit, and the exhibit scene is really funny, where you see this tour guide say how you have to use them to clean the ears, and you just hear Tom saying "ew" in the background. It's good stuff. Anyway, after that, they manage to steal the keys, which leads to them being wanted by this fish king. I love this guy. He's always the best, with the way he speaks and turns into an actual fish at one point. But basically, they try running away only to break a glass cage containing a giant octopus. This leads to them being executed by being put above water. I love how they don't even take a second look and just assume that they're also fish, but anyway, before they go, Ed apologized for breaking Tom's vase, which is a reference to Ruined, in case you remember that episode. It wasn't well back, but yeah. And then Tom apologized for breaking Ed's cat. Anyway, after they realize that they're not actually gonna die, the episode ends. This episode's hilarious. I know I keep saying it, but these last few episodes have been really funny, with the plots being so ridiculous that you just can't help but find it funny. And these are the kind of things I love, like just idiots doing stupid things, and here it works perfectly. I love the lost city of Atlantis and all the fish people that inhabit it, and especially the Fish King. One negative that is kind of minor is that the octopus stuff is just kind of forgettable. Seems like it was added last minute just as an excuse for Ed, Matt, and Tom to get caught, but then again, it's a really good episode that's sadly overshadowed by Tord's departure. 19 out of 20. This episode, Matt gets bitten by a vampire, so he goes back to his house and tries to kill Ed and Tom. After reaching the house, he first tries to kill Ed, but Ed wants to watch a movie with him, so they do that. But after that, Matt's still unsuccessful in killing Ed, so he decides to move on to Tom, who's sitting on his computer. But turns out it was actually a pile of garlic. I love this so much, you have no idea. So basically, Tom and Ed eventually figure out what's going on and use the steak machine gun to kill Matt. But it goes off killing Ed instead, so Tom tries using it himself, but ends up killing himself too in the process. Kinda dark, you know. Anyway, Matt sees what happened and decides to go outside, but he's a vampire, so naturally, as a vampire does, he blows up. And that's how the episode ends. Again, this episode doesn't have much happening in it, but it's just a quick short, so I don't really blame it. Usually what happens, and that applies to this episode too, is that the shorts are usually lackluster in the story department, but they exceed with the humor, and this is no exception. The jokes here are so funny, from the bat who you think is Matt, only for Matt to crush the bat, and then the garlic that's just conveniently placed on Tom's chair, as well as the more smaller gags like Tom's hair somehow bleeding. This is an all-around hilarious episode, and that's sure to give you a good laugh. 18 out of 20. The sequel to Santa Claus. This time Santa sends some carolers to Ed's house to inform them that Santa's actually alive, and that he has captured Santa. So Ed, Matt, and Tom decide to go and save Santa. Santa's evil plan is to give them whatever their hearts desire, which is kinda weird, but okay. Meanwhile, Ed, Matt, and Tom go there by using a Z-gear, which makes the car fly, and of course, Matt has to use logic to stop the car from flying. This scene's really funny, so I'm just gonna play it in its entirety.
Wait a minute, how can a car fly?
We appear to be experiencing some minor turbulence, so please note that the seatbelt sign... Wait, do you ever wonder how planes can actually fly? I mean, they're pretty heavy and... Uh-oh.
We appear to be experiencing some minor turbulence.
Remember where we parked the car?
Anyway, at Santa's lair, they find presents on the ground for them. Edd gets a pool of cola, Tom gets some eyes, and Matt gets money, which all burn up. So they go to Xanta only for Xanta to trick Tom by switching their hats in the classic "Who do I shoot" scene. After shooting the wrong Santa, Xanta shoots a laser which reflects off of Tom's eyes and hits a chandelier, killing him and burning Tom's eyes back to black. And that's how the episode ends. Man, there's so many little details I want to include, and it's getting a little hard to recap these episodes. Anyway, surprisingly, I didn't really like this episode. I know, maybe an unpopular opinion, but I was honestly just kind of disappointed by it. I didn't find the plot to be too compelling, which is a problem with a lot of these episodes, but usually the comedy would make up for the subpar plots. Sadly, this one doesn't have too many jokes in it, with the only jokes I really found funny being the airplane jokes and the gifts burning. The plot is pretty basic, with someone being captured and the main characters having to save it. If it was made in like 2004-2006, I probably would have rated it a little bit higher, but compared to what Edd has been putting out lately, this one's just kind of a dud. 13 out of 20. Let me just say, this episode was a pleasant surprise, and I think now it's one of my favorites. I suggest you watch it if you haven't already, because it's really good. Basically, Tom finds a camera and decides that they could use it to make some money, so they start posting these challenge videos, which is met by just no views at all. So they instead try to strive higher and make a legit film. Already, I think this is an amazing start to the story. They get Edd to make the props, Matt to make the special effects, and Tom to write, and they also get a shoe to find a cast member. After going through many iterations, Tom decides to write about space cats. Meanwhile, the shoe looks for a star and settles on this girl named Laurel. The reason for it is so dumb, it's just because he fell in love with her shoes. And that's literally just it. Edd and Matt go through this montage of making these special effects and finding props, and Matt just scares a bunch of children. It's really funny. So, basically, after all this, they finally make this film in this really funny montage. Again, if you haven't watched it, then what are you doing? Go watch it. I'll wait. Are you back now? Okay. So basically, after filming, Tom edits the film in this really funny scene. In fact, the scene was so funny that 12-year-old me decided it was a good idea to steal it.
Mr. President! The Space Cats are back! We need to get you to safety.
This is a break-in.
Get ready, Santa.
I also exist.
Yeah, that's right. I actually used this in one of my older animations. I'm not too proud of that, but anyway, after burning the DVD, quite literally in fact, they start watching it. Also Laurel dies, the shoe killed her. The movie was amazing, and frankly, I think everyone would have loved it, but of course, everyone hated it, and that's how the episode ends, with the world literally ending because of how bad it was. Yeah, so it's safe to say I had a lot of thoughts regarding this episode. I love it. There are just so many jokes, like joke after joke, and you just can't say all of them here. And they all land so much. Not to mention the plots, which are usually weak in this one, were surprisingly strong. And I love the idea of them making a movie, and it's really funny. And this is just kind of like what Eddsworld is about, just being funny. And it manages to already turn this creative concept into something really funny. So apparently it turns out that Tom actually co-wrote this episode alongside with Edd. And that really shows improvement because while I wasn't too fond of Tom's Tales of Awesome, here, Tom's work really shines. The music here is also fantastic. I love the intro music at the beginning, and the rock music they play during the filming montage is really nice, and I usually find it getting stuck in my head. The animation here is also pretty on par with what we've seen before, and you probably noticed that it's in widescreen, and it just makes everything look a lot nicer and feel more modern. Overall, this is a really good episode, and I love it. 20 out of 20. This episode starts off with Edd and Matt using a lot of electricity, and Tom tells them that they should probably cut down on it. But they continue anyway. Meanwhile, the electricity use causes a power plant to produce this smoke cloud which reaches the Antarctica. This causes a large piece of ice to melt off, and causes a giant wave to head straight towards their house. Tom tells them that in order to stop the wave, they need to remove all the outlets in their house, and of course, in Eddsworld fashion, it works. The wave just stops and then goes in reverse. You can even hear like these reverse beeps from like the cars. It's really funny. Tom ends it by giving a lesson on how we should cut down on electricity use, and that's basically how the episode ends. I really like this episode. It has a nice balance with the humor and also the message it's trying to tell about the environment and stuff. On its own, the episode's really funny, with the giant wave all of a sudden just stopping and then just moving backwards. as well as the way they were able to portray the message through over-exaggeration, but to the point where you still get what the message is, and have a good laugh about it. I should also probably mention the animation. The characters' drawstrings on their hoodies are no longer 2 lines, but rather more detailed, and they look really good. And you can also see a lot more frame-by-frame animation rather than tweens. For those of you who don't know, frame-by-frame is where you just draw each individual frame one by one, while tweens are usually used to make animation more quicker, where you just draw a single image and move it around. Both can look great if done right, but in my opinion, frame-by-frame is generally seen as more prettier. And I think both tweening and frame-by-frame look great here. Edd always has a way of animating that I just find really appealing, like, no matter how he does it. All in all, this episode's pretty funny, and it gives out its message in a pretty fun and creative way. 18 out of 20. It's Christmas morning, and Edd, Matt, and Tom awake. Excited for their presents, they just couldn't wait. But the presents weren't quite what they liked. They sure didn't seem to be very psyched. But no worry, because Matt got a call from his grandmother. But she was mad he hadn't called her for so long. Oh, brother. After the call was done, their hunger was dire. But that was too bad, 'cause the food was on fire. After the fire was extinguished at last, I think it's safe to say they were exhausted, in fact. They sat down at their couch and turned on the TV, and now all their sadness had turned into glee. As the episode ended, I really must say, I again thought the plot was just kind of okay. The humor in this was the main course of the dish, and the animation is as great as I wished. I quite enjoyed this episode. I loved it so plenty that I'm going to rate it a 16 out of 20. I think it's safe to say I'm never doing this ever, and plus, most of my rhymes weren't even that clever. A future version of Edd goes back in time to kill Edd from the present. He does this because cola is outlawed in the future and he doesn't want to experience that future. Edd, Matt, and Tom obviously run away to their house, where they grab anything that they need and quickly escape. They make a stop at a diner where Edd orders 2 gallons of Coke, which is quite a lot. Anyway, future Edd manages to find where they're hiding at, and Edd sprays the Coke into future Edd, distracting him and giving them a chance to run away. Future Edd manages to go back in time to the first zombie attack episode, remember that? As he finds more people to be able to help him. Meanwhile, the future versions of Tom and Matt appear to try to stop future Edd. Present Edd, Matt, and Tom get distracted, leading to future Edd finding them along with other versions of Edd from different points in time. The past versions, however, don't seem to understand future technology, and so they get scared and run away. To make the situation worse, Matt and Edd from the future find Edd and another epic battle ensues, leading to Matt getting the time machine. He uses it not to save them, but instead to change everything from the past and become the ruler of everything in existence. And that's how the episode ends. This is another unpopular opinion of mine, but I don't like this episode too much. I think it's kind of overrated. And that kind of sucks because usually I'm a big fan of time travel plotlines, but here, I feel like not much was done with the time travel aspect. The only really interesting thing was when Edd went back in time to 2005, and you got to see the first zombie attack, which I thought was kind of cool. And the comedy here wasn't all too great either. It just wasn't really that funny, which kind of sucks because these later episodes were actually really funny, and this one just was kind of a dud. But this episode did have a bit of a serious tone to it, which I know some people might like, but it just didn't do it for me. 2+ I can give the episode are that 1, the animation looks fantastic. You can see how much Edd has improved since the beginning, and you can really get a feel for how much he's improved over the year. Another plus is like the plot itself. While I don't really enjoy it, I think it was very compelling and had a lot going for it. But again, it's just not something I can really get behind. 14 out of 20. Oh man, Hammer and Fail, what a classic. You're probably thinking, what's Rival Builders? Well, that's actually the first part of Hammer and Fail. So basically, Matt's room has a lot of junk in it, so they decide to build an attic to their house. While building it, their neighbor, Eduardo, compares his house to theirs, which they somehow made in a